After getting up, I opened the door leading to the small library. I hoped to find information about who lived here or at least where I was. Yesterday, when I looked into the library, the sun was high and the room vacant of light. It was dark, mysterious, and undefined. This morning, the library was still dark except the morning sun was sneaking through a high window in the back. It shined unobstructed down to a dusty wooden floor. The beam was so distinct it looked like a solid pillar of light. Small particles of radiant dust delicately levitated in its beam. It was surreal. Perhaps in the past an eternal being lived here. I sensed one doesn't stumble upon a scene like this. You're summoned or drawn to it. I stood suspended at the doorway until compelled to enter. In the halo of light, I noticed the walls were lined with old wooden bookshelves, reaching from the floor to the ceiling. The books on those shelves appeared like ghostly shadows, dark and obscure. I was sure each shelf was stuffed with eulogistic biographies, undeniable conspiracies, and precarious evidence of time and scope, represented in the form of ancient manuscripts standing compact one next to the other. Each, nervously waiting to give up secrets, screaming while confessing, exposing certain century-old truths should one be drawn, discovered, and exposed. I had to squint to see them. The room smelled old, like musty damp paper. In my mind, I conjured up the form of an enchanted being occupying several lifetimes, breathing this atmosphere, probing, and contemplating. There are particular places which draw you in all the while telling a whole story about itself, about you. The small library this morning appeared to be one of those magical places. I imagined myself being that ancient scholar living here seeking the scientific interpretation of life while speaking in the language of incantations and riddles for an audience of one's self. I love libraries, although I'm not a big reader, more of a picture man myself. Once I entered, it pretended to be another world. I couldn't help sensing something extraordinary would happen. Two wing-back chairs sat before a small desk towards the back, beyond the sunlight. Behind the desk, nearly hidden by shadows, was a high back office chair. In the dim reflection of light, I saw the desk itself was a mess of papers, books, and notebooks. I took a seat in the office chair. Once comfortable, I looked down and noticed a notebook on the desk with my name on it, in bold type. Why was my name on the notebook? It wasn't mine or anything I remember writing. Obviously, someone put it there for me. So, after a short contest with paranoia, I opened to the first page which contained the title Sierra. Forgetting all the spellbound theater of enchantment earlier, I quickly stopped there, got up and went outside onto the porch. I was overwhelmed, and the only thing I could think to do was walk around the property hollering for someone, anyone, to come out. Normally, I never get too excited. Nothing surprises me anymore. Although everything that has happened, and with my name being on the notebook, with the subtitle Sierra on the first page, I found it abnormally disturbing. Despite my concerns, I sensed no immediate danger. However, I felt cautious. Returning to the porch, I walked over to the rocking chair and took a seat. I suspected it to be an elaborate joke by my friends. I yelled the names of the most notorious suspects. Come on, you guys. This is not funny. Apparently, some miscreant who had been within earshot of at least one of my conversations concerning Heaven and Sierra was having their way with me. I spent the next 15 minutes, rocking vigorously, and racking my brain trying to put it together. While trying to figure it out, I became more anxious about my location than the notebook. All the while, I continued calling. No one responded. It made no sense that anyone would go through such trouble to manufacture this kind of joke for my benefit. I knew no one with those kinds of resources to commit such an elaborate misdeed. Perhaps my own Brutus tried to make a point with their truck. I could live with a retired friend, sporting a new case of dementia trying to run me over, but the rest of this, light-hearted and friendly, crazy conspiracy would be impossible for anyone I know. I kept grabbing at straws, hoping my friends, anyone, were playing a practical joke in messing with my head. I did not want to consider alternatives. One of which included an abduction by aliens. Yes, I had to go there. I proved to be a lame subject for experimental research. So, They wiped my memory and dumped me in the field to get rid of me as soon as possible. They should have at least taken me home. Such a crazy analysis would have been a practical assertion except for the notebook. Dumb aliens probably didn't know their way around the neighborhood. Certainly, that's no way to get a second date. Of course, I imagined waiting by the phone, checking my messages. I could only shake my head in disbelief. Just then, I saw out of the corner of my eye a figure running behind the sheets hanging next to the cabin. It looked like an older man with long white hair and a beard. I hurried over to the area. There was no one there. I figured the person was too old to move that fast as to escape my detection. I walked around the cabin. Yep, it was just my imagination. I went back into the cabin, and after walking through every room, I returned to the library to further investigate. I must have overworked my brain and had a hallucination. The thought made me feel insecure. I opened the notebook, and the title still read, Sierra. The subtitle on the next page read, To the Dreamer, Jeff Flake. Again, I became uncomfortable. How can this be? It was driving me crazy, and yet I was only 3 pages into the notebook. I stopped to massage my forehead as I became marginally dizzy, and positively confused. As I struggled with each page, I recalled every detail since the day before, from the point I ended up in the meadow until now. None of what has happened since can with any stretch of the imagination be possible. So, after fighting with myself again, I came to the only sensible conclusion: the whole thing was supernatural, and I was ready to accept such a hypothesis. I sat back in the chair measuring my options on how to continue, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to proceed. Clearly, the notebook was for me. So, after a catch-my-breath pause, I determined to read it and disengage the dramatics. The body of the notebook read: Jeff, this notebook has information to help you complete your adventure. What adventure? We have suspended your duties as a watcher. In case you forgot what a watcher is, please note, it's an office like a governor, a senator, or a janitor. Watchers are officials who clean up messes in Sierra and are tasked with assessing problems and advising others how to resolve those problems. Remember the children. Watchers perform their duties by observing the daily life of ordinary people, communities, cities, local, and national governments. Then, they advise persons, agencies, or principalities on workable courses of action, based on pertinent information, circumstances, and how that advice affects the children. They're not constrained by any of the individuals or agencies mentioned. Each watcher reports to officials in Jerusalem. I understood that. I paused again. It appears someone was too interested in my daydreams. I never revealed such detail to anyone about watchers for fear friends or family might accuse me of having mental deficiencies. I knew what a watcher was. It's the profession I held in my daydreams of Sierra, but I've never revealed, explained, or shared that much information with anyone. Sierra was where I planned to live during the millennium. It's a region in space which included 5 galaxies and 133 inhabitable planets. While most people remained on Earth during the millennium, 42 immortals, redeemed human beings, along with adoptive parents, and 84 million orphan children would leave the Earth and live abroad. That was the basis of my story. As I continued reading, how odd, as the next sentence read: Jeff, don't get distracted by the sunbeam. I knew my dramatic entrance would come back to haunt me. Unintentionally, I turned my attention to the hypnotic dust floating mystically downward and upward in the column of sunlight invading through the single window behind me. Someone knows me well. I became captivated as it seemed alive with movement. The observation gave me the same surreal sensation I often got when dreaming of heaven, imagining myself there. Despite my bewildered condition, I realized something was not right. No one goes to heaven this way when they die or are raptured. All the first steps were absent. There was no gathering in the clouds. Did I miss the marriage supper of the Lamb? What else did I miss? I struggled again with whether I was deceased or alive. Oddly, it still nagged me. Was I dead? Was I somewhere on Earth? I didn't know where. I lost confidence in everything and wished someone was around to resolve my questions. Perhaps I was fabricating the whole thing in my mind. Maybe I'm in bed, in a coma, dreaming. I felt an abysmal twisting sensation in my stomach. This adventure proved more than just imagination, and I continued struggling with it. Again, I thought of the supernatural. I stopped reading. I moved the chair back and sat there for an hour counting my condition, all the while staring at the dust, carefully deciding whether to continue. Feeling uncomfortable, I retrieved another glass of orange juice and returned to the front porch where I took a seat in the rocking chair. I sat there until my attention turned back to my present environment. Even in my altered condition, I loved viewing the yard, the forest, and the lake. I noticed hundreds of bright, colorful hummingbirds feeding on a bush in the front yard. A bright blue one flew towards the cabin and under it. The birds were building their nests under the porch. I thought I would have a look. Lattice skirted the bottom of the cabin. As I got closer to see if I could find a nest, I realized the cabin appeared to be sitting on that lattice as its foundation. Then I noticed it did not touch the ground. The cabin was floating off the ground. Grass, the land under it, was as normal as the rest of the yard and green. The cabin was placed in this spot recently. Otherwise, the plants and grass should have been dead and brown from lack of sunlight. You know what? I didn't even flinch or consider the implications. Of course, it's floating off the ground. Of course, I was flung into the middle of a dream after getting into an accident. Of course, I'm reading a book, exposing the said dream. I wanted it to be shocking, but it was not. So, zombie-like, I moseyed back up to the porch, sat down and devoured the view. A couple of hours later, after observing and meditating on the sound of the squeaking wood rocking chair against the wood porch, I returned to the library and opened the notebook to read again. The sun had moved away from the window and the room was almost dark. I turned on a lamp that was sitting on the corner of the desk, which provided the room with a completely different, magical, atmosphere. Everything was covered in light and shadow. It was eerie, as if one would expect ghosts to be moving about the room. My eyes darted throughout the darkened room as if I caught movement out of the corner of my eyes. Clearly, it was my imagination. I turned my attention back to the notebook. It was still quite easy to read, even in the dim light. You must tell this story, Jeff. By the beginning of the tribulation, the world spiraled into a miserable, chaotic state. All governments were no longer stable, moral, or rich enough to pull it back together. America was in shambles, having overextended itself through corrupt politicians and 3 short failed dictatorships. The America you knew, the light of the world, completely digressed into a feudal society. Economic times were so pathetic many families were living on the street, wandering from place to place, desperately trying to find something to eat. Unfortunately, suicide became a leading cause of death worldwide, accompanied by starvation. Many took their own lives before dying from starvation. It was heart-wrenching to see whole families end their own lives. Even more disturbing was no one cared as the world became immersed in a state of profound indifference towards one another. For an unexplained reason, something compelled me to stand. As soon as I stood, I was no longer in the library, but in a house. Standing in front of me was a young man with a contorted look on his face, who I perceived to be a cop or detective. Even though he was wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, there was an official air around him. He stood 6 feet tall, and was in good shape, with dark, short, neatly cut hair. He was speaking to an officer who was wearing a brown policeman's uniform, in a serious tone. His voice sounded familiar, but I could not place him. He turned to look at me. "Hi, Jeff. How are you?" I tried to explain how I got there. When I did, he cut me off. "We are not here for personal reasons." Another officer in a brown uniform came walking by and said, "Hello, Jack." "Good morning, Marty." Okay, his name was Jack. Rude Jack, I speculated. We were standing in a long, dim hallway. I struggled with slight dizziness from dropping into the hallway. Again, I tried to explain when he startled me with a serious stare, a look directing me to pay attention. I looked away to observe the scene. A beautifully designed carpet ran the full length of the hall where we were standing. Paintings were hanging from one end to the other on both sides. Several intricately carved wooden doors lined each side. It unquestionably was the home of a wealthy person. Jack walked as he explained the scene. We are in South Carolina. This home used to be a gorgeous plantation, full of light, blooming gardens, lush fields, and a family's paradise. We walked to the end of the hall into a child's bedroom. Inside was a small child, dead, lying on her bed. She was carefully dressed in her pajamas and placed as if she was quietly, comfortably sleeping. The heartbroken sun was shining through the windows of her room, lighting several stuffed animals placed next to her. She lay there so naturally in the middle. The child was barely 6 years old. I gasped. What's going on? Jack ignored me. 7 children lay about this house, each murdered by their parents. We walked down the hall past other bedrooms, and each room was just as disturbing. Children posed in different gentle positions upon their beds, including twins and a toddler in his crib carefully dressed up, as if for Sunday school. These parents loved their children. So, what made life so horrible, causing them to commit this shocking massacre? We walked downstairs to the dining room. The parents were behind their dining room table, and each bent over on the floor as if praying. Both took their own lives. The woman looked thin and frail, and before they died, the husband laid his bony arm around her, over her back. An empty bottle of cyanide lay on the floor before them. Their heads were turned and contorted to the side, enough to see the anguish on their faces, their tear-stained and broken faces. Jack spoke. Jeff, these people acted out of fear. They were afraid of what was coming in the near future. So, rather than face that future, they took the lives of their children and themselves in order to escape. Too bad the parents didn't call on God before it was too late, which was the real tragedy here. What a catastrophe, what an example of man's vile condition during the 7 years of the tribulation. No other way to explain it. Unfortunately, this scene has become a common occurrence throughout the world. I was speechless. My heart was being torn to pieces trying to reconcile what I was seeing. And the pain, the fear these parents must have had to cause them to take the lives of their children. Jack said, listen, Jeff, I was standing in the kingdom of God when everything became silent for 1/2 hour. For the first 5 minutes, it was dead silent. Then, in the quietness, I heard the distant sound, a broken sound of someone weeping. It was so heartfelt and gentle that I could hardly hear it. Who was weeping? Was it a man, woman, or child? Perhaps it was all of them. It led me to my knees with despair. I wept within my soul. The mourning came from every direction. I have never heard such pleading, and could not imagine anyone felt that kind of pain. I looked around me, and those beside me were also on their knees. No one daring to make a noise as the psalm of tears filled all of heaven. At the end of the half hour, everyone stood to their feet and worshipped God. A man walked up to me, and I asked him who was weeping. He told me God was weeping. Christ was weeping, and the Holy Spirit was weeping, for the indifference conceived in the hearts of men. Jeff, it wasn't man's hate, it wasn't his love, it was the profound indifference that invaded the world and broke God's heart. After staring at me, Jack turned and walked out the front door. I followed him. I understand everything you just said. Once we passed through the door, we were on a dark street. It looked like a middle-class neighborhood. It was eerily quiet, and all the houses were dark, perhaps vacant. I saw only 2 faint street lights on up ahead, out of a dozen that lined the street. Fires were burning 2 blocks over as you could see the flickering light in the background against the black sky. A pack of dogs came running out of the shadows and past us, each one thin, mangy, and starving. Fortunately, the creatures ignored us. Jack, without missing a beat, kept speaking as the animals ran down the street. It was unsafe to be out at night as dogs and other feral pets roamed the streets, assaulting or killing anything that moved. Many beloved pets were left to fend for themselves, most starving along with their owners. I became apprehensive. We walked 2 blocks and turned the corner to the right where we could see the fires. I observed a barbed wire fence between us and several bonfires ablaze on the other side. As we got closer, I felt nauseous when I smelled and saw the bodies stacked against the fence. Family members were standing right outside the fence sobbing over the dead bodies, frail and holding on to one another. A man fell to his knees while praying before a lifeless body of a young woman. I assumed the woman to be his wife. People in uniform, wearing smoke-stained masks, were carrying the lifeless bodies, tossing them onto the fires. As they did, I heard others who stood outside the fence calling out their names, screaming with tormented hearts. Jack said, people were dying everywhere. These fires burned in every neighborhood and filled the air with a putrid smell of burning and rotting flesh. Men tried to curtail diseases brought on by the decomposing bodies, but millions got sick and died from those diseases. Conditions were similar in every city and country throughout the world. For many, their situation was much worse. How can anything be worse than watching your loved one being tossed onto a bonfire? We walked up to a gate in the fence. Jack opened it, and we entered. Once through, we were standing in an old, broken-down cement building or warehouse. Inside sat a man and woman speaking Japanese. The only light was a candle on a small table between them, casting their eerie shadows against the cracked and broken walls of the room. I could barely make out what they were doing through the flickering light and the maze of shadows. Apparently, the couple was praying to their god and preparing to eat. As my eyes adapted to the light, I saw what they were eating. They were eating the human arm of a man, or a woman, perhaps a child. I could see small boiled fingers where the flesh was cooked away. With my eyes readjusted to the dusky light, I saw how grossly thin they were. Both cried, and then sobbed, all the while picking at the flesh. Jack looked at me with tears in his eyes. Regularly, cannibalism followed the mealtime prayer,